Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot. We charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Welcome to Book Talk for Book Talk, a podcast where we deep dive into the writing of your favorite novels.
This is Jac.
And I'm Amy.
In Season 1, we explored Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses. In our post-season content, we look forward to sharing listener feedback and thoughts we received over the last 8 weeks, as well as listener content from some special guests.
The views expressed by the hosts and guests are entirely their own and in no way represent the thoughts or intentions of the original author. This podcast is a discussion shared to spark thought and conversation on the characters and themes of this novel.
Though the hosts speak mostly within the constraints of this book, series spoilers may be discussed with or without warning. Explicit language as well as themes of sex, violence, abuse, and depression will reoccur throughout this podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
Today's guest is one of our favorite authors. S.B Nova's debut novel, Draken, marked the start of her Southern Fires series. Closely related to her second novel and a personal favorite, A Kingdom of Exiles, the first book in her Outcast series. Nova lives in the UK and spends most of her time reading, writing, and, in her words, drinking too much caffeine. When we're asked for book recommendations, Nova continues to be one of our top authors, and her novel, A Kingdom of Exiles, has set the bar on what we wish and hope to achieve in our own writing. We are thrilled to have Nova on the podcast today to talk about her writing process and how she both world builds and develops characters for her novels. Welcome, Nova.
Welcome. Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You have no idea how excited we are and nervous. Before we start recording, I told you, but I will repeat it again, that whenever we get people recommending, asking us, like, what should we read? It's time and time again. I'm always recommend, like, Kingdom of Exiles. Whenever I recommend a book to Amy, I have very high standards of what I recommend to her because I feel like I have a reputation to upkeep. Again, Kingdom of Exiles is fantastic. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really sweet.
Part of what we're doing, right, is we talk about a lot of Sarah J. Maas. So Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses uses the trope of Beauty and the Beast to build a framework for her story, only for Maas to defy the reader's expectations. To what extent do you rely on tropes familiar to readers, and what use do they have in your stories?
I don't know if I use tropes that regularly, but I definitely, when I started writing Exiles, it was kind of a last-ditch attempt to be a writer, to be honest. And so I made a conscious choice to kind of just throw everything that I loved and everything I was, I guess, into the book, because I kind of just felt like I had nothing left to lose, basically. So one of the things that I love and has kind of influenced me a little bit is grim fairy tales. So a little bit like Sarah J. Maas. I'd actually be very interested to know why she chose Beauty and the Beast. I don't know why, but it would be interesting to know. And yeah, so I have always loved grim fairy tales. Obviously, I grew up, well, not obviously, but I grew up in the 90s, so I also love Disney fairy tales. But yeah, I think I just had this image when I started thinking about Exiles. I don't really know how to explain it other than saying that I just knew that it had to start off in this very kind of slightly dark, grim place. And all the kind of, some of the imagery that I use in Exiles is directly kind of influenced by some of the imagery in grim fairy tales, like the forest is a big one. I also use kind of some nods to fairy tales in my chapter titles. So like Following the Breadcrumbs, I think is one of them. And like The Evil Stepmother. I'm not sure if it's evil or wicked, but anyway. And I definitely had a sense of starting off in a place that was kind of sort of typical fairy tale. And then very, very quickly just walking away from that, you know? So I've had a couple of people say to me, or like in reviews and things, like they thought that it was going to be like some Snow White knockoff or something. And because I also have like a couple of things like The Evil Stepmother and sort of things like that. But yeah, very quickly sort of walking away from that and not sticking to it by any, you know, stretch of the imagination. And I think I've read ACOTAR a very long time ago. It must be like 5-6 years, but I do recall her sort of she uses the framework, but she, especially at the end, I kind of got a sense she was going to kind of walk away from the whole Beauty and the Beast thing, because I had a sense that she was going to go in a different direction in terms of who, you know, the main character fell in love with. So anyway, yeah, so grim fairy tales is a big one for me, and coming of age tropes as well, which to be honest are very common in fairy tales anyway.
Can't wait to when like I reread it all the time, and I'm excited to like go in with that perspective of just focusing in on grim fairy tales, because I know just keeping that in mind is going to change the way that I look at it.
I didn't want to go too deep into that whole, because I mean you could just, because I do love fairy tales, so it would be very easy to kind of just fall into that, but I didn't want to want to go down that road too much. But the beauty of fairy tales as well is like, funnily enough, I actually studied them a little bit at university because they were relevant to kind of the film that we were studying at the time. And it was always, they were kind of taught, my lecturer was telling me like how important fairy tales actually were and how they were very useful for measuring how societies change over time, because obviously you start with these really old fairy tales and they're very sort of, especially the grim ones, they're really screwed up, to be honest. And then you kind of very slowly get these deviations and, you know, sort of you get the Disney and, you know, like the 40s version of Snow White's very different to, you know, whenever the newest version was coming out. There's been like 20, but you know, so in that way I find it very, very interesting to kind of, you know, start with that slightly, you know, Serene as this kind of slightly well, I've never considered her fragile, but I know other people have considered her fragile, but this kind of like slightly fragile, in inverted commas, character, but then slowly you kind of start to see that's not who she is. Anyway, I don't think that's who she is. But then I know like the future parts of her. So
she just starts off like as a normal person. Normal people are fragile. Like that's, I mean, look at me, extremely fragile.
Well, I always had a mentality of she's an 18-year-old girl. So yeah. I mean, me at 18, oh dear, I was very, very insecure, and you know, put me in a situation like she was in, and I would be probably worse than her. So
no, she's one of my favorites, like favorite heroines for sure.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, she definitely comes across as strong, and it's interesting that people have compared her, or at least the start of Exiles, to Snow White, because I never would have made that connection, because she always seemed so much more independent and capable than the Snow White character comes across to me.
Well, it's funny because I sort of was trying to play a little bit. So, for instance, her physical appearance, right, is a little bit like Snow White.
Yeah.
I honestly, because Exiles, I wrote that quite a long time ago, I don't know if I went into it like thinking, oh, she's like Snow White, but I've definitely since realized that. But the kind of so for instance, like the fact that she was pale, that was always kind of just a reflection on where she lived, right? So it wasn't because, oh, I wanted to make her this kind of waif-like character or anything like that. And the fact that she was skinny to me was always because she was missing a vital part of herself. So she was missing that part of herself that was literally yanked away from her before she was even born. So that kind of vitality that is kind of inherently fey was taken from her. So that's why she's kind of like almost too thin, you know. It's not because she's like I'm trying to like glorify that sort of, oh, that's beautiful. Because obviously to me anyway, all sorts of body types are beautiful. But so it was never really about making her like Snow White.
Yeah, like there's just more meaning behind all of it, which again, like there's always more meaning behind everything, which is why, we like to critically read all like stories, just because there's very specific choices that authors make.
Yeah.
For our next question, one parallel I've seen in Thorns and Roses, or at least in the Thorns and Roses series and your novel Exiles, is that there are many subplots and individual character journeys taking place simultaneously. From physical and emotional journeys to character development, how do you map out all the nuances to ensure proper pacing and that you're hitting the key points to make sure we see both the big picture and the character stories as coherent and believable?
Oh, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, in terms of how do I map everything out with my character journeys? I mean, I went into Exiles knowing the characters, knowing their personality, their history, their goals and conflicts, both kind of interior and exterior. And then as I kind of go along through the books and plotting them out, I mean, I kind of had the whole series plotted out, but I do allow for some kind of organic changes that happen as when you're a writer. I'm sure you know that there's sometimes things just happen and you're like, oh, that happened. Okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of figure out, I take those characters and kind of what they're going through. I figure out how they're going to overcome some of those conflicts and how best to kind of fit it in with the story that I'm telling. So I guess I'm focusing on how the interior conflicts of my main protagonists are going to kind of deal with the external pressures, and how to do that in a way that's actually entertaining or meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, those character arcs and the story arcs, they can influence each other. I try not to be too rigid in kind of what comes first in terms of importance. I feel like it's kind of just they just flow into each other, basically. And in terms of how do I ensure proper pacing, I mean, to be honest, there's not really any great way to answer that. I can think how to answer it best with an example. So in the next book, A Kingdom of Nomads, without saying too much, obviously.
Oh my God, you're saying you're...
Yeah. Without saying too much. So basically in that story, there are certain characters that, because of what's happening in the story, they can't be as present on the page, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult to develop their characters and their kind of, story arcs when they're not even around, right? Mm-hmm. So I kind of already knew this going into it, but I sort of have developed the characters that are there. This is very awkward trying to explain this, but I've tried to develop the characters that are there because I know that in the third book, things are going to turn around again and we're going to get sort of more from the people who weren't there in the second book. I'm sorry, that's really vague, but I'm really careful not to give anything away. But so that's kind of part of the pacing.
It makes absolute sense to me though, what you're saying, where it's you have a vision of where it's going and you need to get there and things are going to change by the time you get there. It makes sense.
It's quite difficult, especially with my editor, because I remember having this conversation with her and she was like, oh, don't you think that, you need to kind of, what about this character and that character? I was like, yeah, but don't worry, that's going to come out in the third book. And it's you have to keep that vision in your head. You have to trust yourself to an extent, because obviously, my editor doesn't know everything that's going to happen in the coming stories. So yeah, you kind of sometimes just have to trust your own judgment when it comes to pacing and how to kind of give each character their moment in the sun. Obviously, it's important not to let the reader forget that, character. Mm-hmm. And you can do that in all sorts of different ways, I mean, I'm not even there's a lot of different techniques you can use to kind of make sure that character stays in the reader's mind. But yeah, it's important to me because obviously I do have quite a lot of main characters. So 5, I guess. Serena will never be not the main character. But so I'm never going to have I should probably say that I'm never going to have this kind of book where suddenly every character becomes the main character. But the pack, as it were, will be kind of Yeah, we'll have their moment where we're kind of going through something with them, whether it's kind of dealing with some inner conflict, or they get to step up in a certain way, or mature or grow or whatever.
I love the pack so much. It's
Me too.
I appreciate what you're saying related to the characters are going to do the work for growth, but it's going to happen on the page. And if they can't be on the page, it's not going to happen. Because as a reader, I find it extremely frustrating if a character goes and has this journey and then comes back a changed character, but none of the work was done. We didn't get to see any of that. Yeah. So I appreciate that you're like, nope, it can't happen. They're not here.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important for us as readers.
If something's really important in terms of what they're going through, then I will probably do something, some sort of chapter or something from their perspective, if it's really important and we can't find it through any other way.
I'll never stop talking about the pacing of your book. And I think that just ultimately comes down to talent. Like, it's kind of hard where, to describe where, like, sometimes someone's just really good at it. And I'm sure you like map it out, but you're very good at it. And it's just I almost describe it like several books happening within one book, because so much happens, but it never feels sped up. It never feels too slow. It's just a very well-paced story.
Wait till you read Nomads. Jesus. that was I mean, Exiles was kind of difficult in terms of how to, well, and actually it wasn't difficult in terms of pacing, because I sort of knew the story I was gonna create, but Nomads, that's difficult to do just because there's so much happens in it. So when you have so much going on, that you have to make sure that it's A, not overwhelming the reader, and B, sort of, sitting well with the reader as well. It's not kind of going too fast, or, suddenly, there's way too much information. That's definitely a point where you have to check your writer's ego and just go, the reader doesn't actually need to know this. Let's just, cut that out.
I don't know. I trust you. It was so, like, you're just so spot on, like, with the first one, that I was like, I felt like there was a lot happening. And now that you're saying the second one has a lot happening, I'm like, oh my. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. I guess, the first one, a lot does happen. But I suppose, I mean, as well, it was quite sort of fixed geographically speaking. So we sort of had a few, so we have Tunnock, we have the forest, we have a sort of a journey with Hunter, and then we have the camp. And then that's kind of it, really. We sort of go outside of the camp occasionally, but whereas Nomads is like all over the joint.
Her character development is so distinct, and a lot of times, like, characters haven't earned that, but she earns that. Like, it makes sense that I never end up at the end, like, from point A to point Z and be like, how did we get here? It just progresses naturally.
Yeah. I've always been quite aware of, so for instance, kind of related to the question, I find it very annoying, might be a bit strong word, but I find it quite difficult sometimes when characters mature at the pace of the speed of lightning, and I always try and remember, like, how old the character is. So for instance, Adriana's 30, right? So Adriana's 30.
Oh yeah.
Serena's 18. So, for instance, I've heard people try and compare them in terms of strength, and I'm like, well, I'm 30, so I know what it's like to be a 30-year-old woman and an 18-year-old woman, and there's a big difference, in terms of confidence and where you're at maturity-wise. So the idea that Serena would be acting in a way that Adriana, when they're from completely different worlds as well, is sort of a bit strange to me. So kind of how, characters mature is also dependent upon actually how old they are and their circumstances and those sorts of things. Because I know Fraser, for instance, I don't want to say he's never going to mature, because that's not true, but he's like the most fixed character. So that maturity is not going to happen as kind of quickly as some other characters.
That's fair. So how do you end up conceptualizing your characters? Like, how do you flesh them out to what extent do you know their backstory, like the main characters, even the secondary characters when you start writing? And I know there's a lot of questions coming at you. And how much of their story unravels to you as you write? Like, is there ever a moment as you're writing, you're like, oh, I didn't know that about you, and they just kind of reveal themselves? Or do you have a very clear idea of who they are?
By this point, I have a very clear idea of who they are.
Fair.
In terms of the pack, certainly. Like, I mean, how do I conceptualize them? So are you asking, like, how did I come up with them?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of everyone comes in with their own history and their own story, and you've clearly figured that out, even if we don't know as the reader how much is actually happening. So before you start writing, do you come up with their backstory, or is that something that unravels as you go along?
No. They have very, very detailed backstories. I have everything from how do they smell, what are their favorite colors, what music would they like if they were in this world, and I know them very well by this point. And I have kind of all of their backstories. I actually, my editor once asked to see the character bio, so I sent them to her, and she said, I'm never going to get through all this. Why did you send me this? I was like, oh, I'm sorry. So I know a lot about them at this point. To be honest with you, there are things that have changed over the course of time, just because of things that happen in the story. Not a lot, not their core personalities, but maybe something like, potentially something in their backstory might come up. So there is something in Nomads that I realized about Fraser. I kind of knew anyway, but it was like it wasn't fully fleshed out in my head, I guess. And then as I was kind of pretty quick into writing Nomads, I was like, oh, I suddenly had this moment of like, oh, okay. I have all of their backstories very well fleshed out. And in terms of how do I conceptualize them, I mean, to be honest, some of them came into my head a lot easier than others. Fraser was probably the most distinct. It might be because he's actually slightly based upon somebody I know.
Oh.
So just not like, he's not like a knockoff or anything, but just some personality types. It was kind of based on a relationship, but not an actual romantic relationship, just a friendship I had with somebody. And it kind of inspired me because I realized I was quite young at the time. And I think it was the first time I realized just how close you can be to somebody who wasn't, you weren't romantically interested in. I know it sounds kind of silly in a way, but like for me to be sort of so close to a guy who's single and from outside perspective attractive, but there was literally no romantic feelings whatsoever. And I think at that age, all my friends were sort of saying, oh, you must be attracted to him because you're so close. On that, nope, not even close. So that kind of relationship, more than maybe his personality, like there were certain personality traits that were there, kind of the antisocial stuff, but yeah, so the kind of relationship inspired Fraser the most. And yeah, so some of it's based upon my own experiences with people, with friends. Some of it's based upon just my imagination, just what kind of came into my head at the time and just felt so right. I think as a writer, sometimes you will have these moments like, oh yeah, that's right, that makes sense.
Those are the best moments every single time.
Yeah, and kind of, yeah, I guess that's it. And also a big part of it as well was figuring out, it wasn't just from, oh, this character is going to be like this and, because of this and this. But it was also because I was looking at it because I knew I wanted to create this kind of pack dynamic and this sort of friendship dynamic, which was really important. And so part of figuring out the characters was also figuring out how they were going to work together. How do they balance each other out? How do they communicate with each other? What are going to be the conflicts there? How are those relationships going to develop with time as they develop? So that's actually a big part of it as well. It's kind of how do I conceptualize them and flesh them out, is thinking about how are they going to balance each other out? Why do they work as a team?
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because you know I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.
Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Going back to something that Jac said earlier, one thing that I really loved about Exiles and that has inspired me in my own writing is the momentum of your stories. You do a lot without taking up a lot of real estate on the page. How did you develop that style, or, was there something that inspired it? And how do you have a technique, or is it just pure talent that keeps your writing so focused?
So I spoke earlier about kind of after Draken and when I was starting Exiles and kind of the mental, the attitude that I had. And that was just basically, I think it wasn't really a mistake. It's something that you do, I think, when you're a bit younger, which is kind of trying to appeal to the most amount of people, right? And I realized after Draken and when I started Exiles that I just kind of almost didn't really, if I was going to do it, and because again, this was kind of going to be my last shot or whatever, I was going to do it just being completely me. And part of that is my own preferences, actually. So for instance, I'm very keenly aware of A, how little time people have, and B, how short people's attention spans can be. So when you're reading something because I knew my books, I don't know why I knew this, but I knew my books were going to be long. So if you have a long book, in my opinion, I do like some books that kind of just are really detailed and like blah, 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 blah. But honestly, it'll take me a long time to get through them, and I felt like I didn't want people to sit down with my book and go, God, this is going to take me a month to read. I just really didn't want that in people's heads. I wanted people to go, okay, this is 600 pages, but, and then start and then just go, oh my goodness, like just read it in like 3 days or something. So kind of keeping everything focusing more on shorter sentences, shorter paragraphs, kind of trying to using the freedom that the first person perspective gives you, rather so just almost like talking directly more than just kind of, well, I don't want to say beating around the bush, but just kind of almost talking as directly as you can to the reader. And also kind of in terms of what inspired it or the style or whatever, it was, again, partially from going okay, this is my last shot. I'm going to take everything that I love about stories and I'm just going to throw it on the page. So part of that is some of the imagery I use. Again, I've talked about fairy tales, but there's more to it than that. I kind of wanted a book that was very vivid in terms of its imagery without being too excessive. So it's just about picking and choosing where you put that. So for instance, like, is it Jane? No, it isn't. It's Jane Bronte. Jane Eyre. Right. So Jane Eyre has 2 pages in it where she just talks about the seasons, right?
Yeah.
So she just talks about how, March turns into February, turns into April and things like that. But the way she does it is so, so beautiful. And although I would not spend 2 pages talking about the season changes, I do think that kind of beauty is really important to me, which I guess is why I use kind of quite a lot of imagery and metaphors and things like that. But at the same time, trying not to exhaust the reader's eye. That's a really big thing. Just, because you can tell as well when you're reading, if something starts to slowly drag on your eye. It's a bit of a weird image to say, but that's the best way I can put it, is I'm just very keenly aware of when your eye starts to go, ugh, okay, this is starting to kind of like, drag a little bit or get too repetitive or something like that. So just kind of, I guess poetry is a big influence for me in that, the fact that they can say so much in 2 lines and it be just beautiful. So that's what I try to get at, I suppose. So yeah, poetry is probably one of the biggest influences, because I remember when I was writing Exiles and to an extent Nomads, suddenly I'll just be writing or I'll just be walking around talking to my voice recorder, and suddenly like rhyming will come into my head. I'm like, why am I rhyming? So I guess it's just kind of that sort of rhythm. It's almost like a without getting too up my own sorry it's a bit like finding that rhythm and finding that fluidity, as best as I can. So yeah,
that's so smart. I mean, that's a great way of looking at it, where like poetry, it's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, but extremely beautiful, very you know exactly what you're seeing, and it's the same way that you describe the world that they're in. Like it's vivid and I can see it and it's beautiful. And I'm tucking that idea away of like use poetry as inspiration, like that. Duh, that makes sense. That's
yeah it definitely creates very strong, a strong image in your head. I mean, that's why I used a poem at the beginning the book, because in a way that poem describes the entire book, like what I was trying to get at almost with Serena's journey. And I do the same in Nomads as well, at the end, which is kind of just like in 2 lines it basically describes the entire book. So yeah,
good to know. I'll be paying attention to that.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting balance that you've struck between what are your preferences, and that people don't have long attention spans. And that's such an interesting way of looking at the style, and something I'm going to have to really think about, because if I've always told myself, if I'm reading my draft of the first chapter and I'm starting to get bored, I always convince myself it's because I've read it a million times. And maybe it's not because I've read it a million times. Maybe it is because I don't have a long attention span. And my reader isn't going to enjoy this either.
Yeah, it is difficult, because I think there's quite a few, especially when you have a chapter where you have to impart a lot of information. And it is one of the hardest things as a writer, thinking, okay, what does the reader actually need to know? And what is just me wanting the reader to know this?
Yep.
So it's kind of, and if, my editor's pretty harsh with me. It's like, you don't need this. Just don't have it in. I was like, oh, okay. Because fantasy writers especially can get who get a bit carried away sometimes with how much they're putting in the book, and it's easy to do, because as fantasy writers we have this love of world building, right? And you just want to, you've researched it and you've gone, kind of, you want people to see it as clearly as you do, but at the same time people don't have a month, okay, to read books, or if they do, it's usually because you're one of their favorite authors and they're willing to sit with you through God knows how many pages. And I don't really ever want to be that kind of writer that's sort of almost forcing people to sit there and read just because they, happen to be a fan or whatever. So
that's fair. Like, you don't want to win people over, or you don't want people to read it just because they're committed. It's more of like, enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard because I am committed. So, but I promise I'll enjoy it too. I know. So this is me at an entirely selfish question. Now, we sent it over to you, but as writers, Amy and I are both very interested. What is your writing process? How do you organize your notes? There's so much that you have. Like, how do you even capture and organize that? How do you come up with the ideas? And it's just like, there's so much detail involved that I don't like, how do you even keep track of all of it? And I wish I had a pen and paper so I can take notes on this.
With great difficulty. No. So, okay. Well, in terms of where do I organize my notes and things like that, I use, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the writing program Scrivener.
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so so before Scrivener, I was using Word, which was not easy. I just had about 15 different documents with all the kind of different character bios and story arcs and etc. With I don't want to make this sound like an advert, okay? But basically, I'm just being honest with. So with Scrivener, you can put everything in one place. So you'll have kind of like drop down boxes on the left hand side with kind of, I'm literally looking at, I can kind of see it in the corner of my eye because it's always up on my screen, my icon. So like series plot, you can have kind of just below the chapters, you can have character bios, timelines, all that sort of stuff. So it's just really easy to kind of, when you're writing a chapter, it's just like click on, the tab below, and then you can see the timeline and make sure that you're not doing something silly. You're making sure that you're keeping everything clear. So that's kind of how I organize my notes. And kind of just keep everything in one place, basically, because without that, it's very, very difficult. Because actually, with Exiles,
I will be signing up to that platform.
Yeah, don't do what I did. I actually wrote Exiles longhand the first time.
Wow,
that blew my mind, really.
Yeah, I went through about 4 notepads. It was really quite funny. And in terms of what is my writing process, or how do I come up with ideas? Well, most of it's planned out ahead of time. So I have the whole series planned out in my head, but I also allow room for changes that I think, if I think of a change, I think, oh, that works way better, then obviously I'm going to use it. It is really difficult because I'm sure as writers, you'll know if you change one thing, about 50 different things have to change. And it's incredibly, it's hard to keep it all in your head. And it takes, unfortunately, the most boring answer is it just takes a lot of time, right? That's one of the reasons Nomad's taken so long, because I don't want people, because, plot holes and things, that's not acceptable to me. So I guess it sometimes happens, and if it happens, it happens, but as far as I'm concerned, if I can do everything in my power to avoid that, I will. And that just takes rereading. It takes a really good editor. It takes, my sister's my beta reader, who's like, she always jokes she's my biggest fan, which is quite funny, but she's read it like 5 times. So just kind of having people read it, reading it myself, and kind of, I guess, again, writing process. It's all sorts of different things. Obviously, I know where things are going. And as I mentioned earlier, some of my best ideas come from just walking around. So I'll go for a walk and I'll have a voice recorder, and maybe I'll see things, or I'll have conversations going in my head. The conversations between characters flow a lot easier. And I don't know why, but when I'm walking, they just flow into my head a lot more naturally. And I can sort of get the character more, like it's just a lot easier. It's more natural, because that's something to me that's very important to me as well. I don't like dialogue that feels a bit stilted, and it's really important for me to kind of have the characters sound like them, and even if they're sort of explaining something, for them to explain it in a way that's them. So Kai would probably do it through a joke, or Adriana would do it with a bit of a very sort of blunt way.
It works out that you live in a beautiful place that has gorgeous walking scenery. Amy and I live in LA, so we can walk towards a palm tree on fire, and that's what we have here. It's not the most inspiring for a fantasy area.
Yeah, my dog would definitely appreciate it if I walked more.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to do it in your car. Isn't that
Yes.
what LA is famous for?
Yes,
Lots of cars
lots.
or something.
It's so depressing. I there, at least like even within London, there was parts like the parks were just large and beautiful, and you can actually go and walk around. And the only thing we have here is a canyon that you can walk up. And honestly, it's too vertical for me. I can't. I'm a horizontal walker.
You have the beaches, right? Are the beaches any good?
They're okay. The problem is
they're like, Amy, you say the problem. There's so many problems.
I think one of the biggest problem is that there are so many tourists, and it makes it less enjoyable. And it's
there's lots of tourists here.
True.
It's also a lot dirtier than people realize. Mm-hmm. It's not like I'm outside in the fresh, clean air. It's just like I'm outside, but somehow my lungs are worse. Like, how did this happen? That's it's a gross place.
Yeah, I have actually heard that.
But if you come to LA, we'll show you the good parts.
We'd love to take you out to lunch.
I've actually wanted to go to LA for a while. I lived in Vancouver for a while, and I was always talking with my friends about driving down kind of that, scenic route and going to LA for a while. Because one of my friends was there for a while doing a film. She was doing, is it Sun Film Festival? Can't remember what it's called.
Sundance?
Yes, that's it.
Oh, the big one. Yeah, the good one. That's the
yeah. She was program something director.
That's so cool.
So similar to Sarah J. Maas, you have two different series that exist in this same or connected universe. How far in advance did you plan for interconnectedness between these stories, and what sort of details develop as happenstance?
Well, I knew after I'd finished Draken and started Exiles that I wanted them to be connected. At the time, it was because I wanted to do the books in tandem. I will not be doing that. Okay. Outcast series takes way too much. And I think, honestly, I think for many, many reasons, I would like to, because the thing with Draken is the world that I created was something that I really enjoyed. However, because just because I've changed a lot as a writer, I think it would be quite hard now to go back and write that series. And also, to be honest, just from a very practical point of view, I mean, I'm sure you know, being a writer is not easy financially. You have to be very careful with how you plan things out. So I just don't really have the luxury of working on a book that is probably not going to make that much money or make as much money as Outcast possibly could. So it's kind of been put on the back burner.
Oh, that makes sense. Totally.
Yeah. Well, it's just, and it's annoying, but you can't afford to take a year out. Well, say a year out, but take a year or however long it's going to take and write a book that, I mean, it's always a risk to write a book, right? Mm-hmm. I knew that going into it. I didn't expect to make billions or anything. I wasn't trying to be, trying to sort of, I didn't even think I'd be able to do it professionally, but I have managed to do that. I have managed to get into a position through some unbelievable stroke of luck. I've managed to get there. So yeah, you kind of have to you just have to look out for yourself, basically. And also, I really love writing Outcast. So, I
mean, at the end of the day, it's like being a smart businesswoman too.
Yeah, you just that's just you just have to, especially if you're actually no, in any kind of line of publishing. I was going to say especially if you're self-published, but the same is true of traditionally published authors. So at the moment, I don't, I have to focus on Outcast and getting through to the end. Because it's probably going to be about 6 books, so it's going to be quite a long.
What?
Yeah, a long ass time. So there are other books as well. It's really frustrating because there's one series as well that I've really just love the concept of it. And it's a series that could actually bridge Outcast to Draken. And it's done through, well, I can't really say how it's done because that would be a bit weird. But
that would be revealing too much.
That would be a spoiler.
But it's let's put it like this. At the end of the Outcast series, there is a way that I could go into Southern Fire, and I want to keep that window open just to see kind of, and even if I don't go on to Southern Fire, I can do possibly another series that's sort of interlinked.
I'm so excited for everything.
So I know years in advance is kind of the answer to that question.
Oh my God. I didn't even realize it was going to be 6 books. You just made my day.
Yeah.
Well, I think it gives me comfort that I'm like, okay, I have a series, I've planned it, it's 4 books long. Is that ridiculous? That like this is a mutual experience that you're having as well of like, oh, I know my series, it's 6 books long, I'm not going to skimp on that.
It's a difficult balancing act, right? You can kind of almost get a bit carried away, like with some series. I'll kind of, there's a series at the moment I'm reading which I love, but I mean we're on like book 9 or something, and it's it's almost like, do we really, do we need this? This is getting a bit kind of much now. It's almost like just writing for the sake of writing. So I never want that to be the case. Mm-hmm. I always want to have a story to tell, and a story to tell. That's meaningful.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I've also read series where, you'll get to the final book and everything is just shoved in there. Mm-hmm. And and it unfortunately often happens with, maybe, no, that's not fair. I was going to say it sometimes happens a lot with traditionally published authors, not through any fault of their own, but because they'll have deadlines, they'll have people saying, this makes this much money and you got to, and it's just kind of like gets a bit conveyor belt sometimes, not because, through any fault of their own, but it just kind of happens, I guess. And it's the same actually for self-published authors, because you just have that constant pressure, there's a lot of authors now who are pushing themselves to write a book every 3 months. And I just feel, it's crazy. It's just like, how do you do it?
No.
You're not eating, you're not sleeping, you mustn't be.
Wow.
If someone had to tell me you have to write a book in 3 months, I'd cry. Like, I just...
Yeah. I'd go find a new job.
I would break down. I cannot do that.
It's a lot.
So you talked about like that you're reading a book currently, and as a fantasy writer, how much do you read? How much of what you read is fantasy versus non-fantasy? What are some of the other genres that you read? Personally, I am a huge fan fiction person, and I love any Draco and Hermione fan fiction. But what expands? Like, what genres do you read?
Well, certainly I mostly read fantasy and young adult. But if it goes outside of that genre, then it would probably be romance and historical fiction. The thing with romance is, though, you can have that in fantasy, often they go hand in hand, to be honest. So definitely I love a good romance. But the thing is, I don't know, sometimes romances aren't really enough for me. That's why I've never done pure romance, because I love romance, right? I'm I'm a bit, I don't know, kind of a cross between a cynic and an endless optimist when it comes to love. So I definitely love a good romance, but I do prefer it when it's got more going on, just because that's again, sort of, that's who I am as a person. But I love historical fiction as well. I've actually really gotten into recently. I like reading books kind of outside of my own cultural sphere. So I've been reading a couple of books now. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right. I really hope I am. So I've been reading a couple of wuxia books. I think that's right. So that's about martial arts heroes, which is a Chinese kind of literary genre. And I just really, really like it, because also a lot of Chinese fantasy stories, they're very much focused on, like, they have a massive fantasy genre. There's so much kind of going on in terms of like demons and gods and mortals and sort of cultivation and spirituality. I just find it really fascinating, because it's just outside of my cultural sphere, and that can be so liberating, I think, as an author. I love reading things that I'm like, I didn't know you could do this.
Yeah.
not like that necessarily, but just kind of, you know, different takes. And yeah, I just find it really fascinating when people kind of think outside the box a bit, you know.
So you've mentioned your editor a lot during this interview. What is the relationship between you and your editor like? And how much input do they get in the final draft of your book?
In terms of story, not much, to be honest, because, you know, she beta, well, she didn't do a beta edit for Exiles. I think that was somebody else. Although, as I said, it was a long time ago now, so I don't quite remember. But she's done one for Nomads, and I think because it was only after like 2 drafts that she read it, and it just wasn't in the state, you know, I think it was like my eagerness almost, because it's sort of, I was like killing myself for ages to finish this second draft. And I think I just wanted to kind of get someone else's opinion on it. And truthfully, like, although obviously she gave me comments and things that were helpful, I don't know how to say this. It's not anything that I would have. I think you need to be your own best judge sometimes with kind of how the story actually goes. And it is really useful to have someone say, oh, this isn't working or that isn't working. But yeah, in terms of beta edit, I've got to be honest, it might have just been my own mistake kind of when that was done. It might have been more useful after the 3rd draft. But yeah, so in terms of, the kind of story, I'm not sure she's had that much influence. But in terms of copy editing, Nomads, she's great. I mean, she's wonderful. I really respect her. We might not always agree, and that's fine, you know, there's certain things that she didn't like in Exiles. I think she wanted me to cut out like the Winged Fiends chapter, but I told her for many reasons I couldn't do that, and she respected that. So yeah, there were things that she kind of suggests, like, oh, is this really necessary? Because obviously they're going to suggest it because they don't know what you're writing, you know, they don't know what's going to happen in book 3, whereas you probably will as a writer,
right?
So yeah, but in terms of pacing, she's amazing. She's very familiar with my style now. So she's very focused on kind of, oh, hang on, you haven't used this technique. Why have you stopped using that in like chapter, I don't know, 3 chapters ago, you were using this technique. Why aren't you using it now? Or maybe don't do this because it again drags the eye. So she's kind of on the same level as me. You know, she doesn't want people to get bored, to be honest, for lack of a better word. You know, she wants people to keep going, keep reading. She has actually mentioned something which I already knew was kind of an issue. She mentions that because Nomads is kind of basically 3 parts because it's so friggin' long. It's actually not that crazy long, but anyway. But there's something in part 2 that she was like, this is maybe dragging a little bit because everything up to now has been really fast paced, so you might want to. And I was like, yeah, I don't know how to change that. So it's great though that someone sort of says that, you know, so you can try and work on it as best you can. So yeah, I respect her a lot, and you don't always have to agree. But yeah, she's been great at kind of keeping me stylistically steady. I can't think of a better word than that, sorry.
Yeah.
Sort of, you know, keeping me, you know.
She's like keeping you honest in a way of like who you are.
Yeah. And if I kind of, because I tend to be somebody who gets a bit, I don't like being too repetitive in terms of the things, you know, the techniques I'm using and stuff like that. I think that can almost get a bit, I don't know how to say this without sounding a bit, it can get a bit tiring sometimes when people are very, like, they have such a strong style, and it's like after like 5 books it's kind of like you know, maybe you don't need to do that quite as much, you know. So I don't ever really want to get too mired in my own style, you know?
That's fair.
But she definitely keeps me kind of focused. Yeah, she keeps me focused. That's the best way of putting it.
That's amazing. So finally, a lot of our listeners like to write and are writers and want to learn how to write, essentially. What advice do you have for aspiring writers?
I mean, there's just a lot. Well, not because I'm some great font of knowledge, just because, I mean, I've, you know, taken in so much, I think, from other writers. I think that's, you know, kind of a must. I guess read as much as you can. Sorry if that's a bit kind of too basic, but yeah, read as much
but
as
it's
you
true.
can. Figure out. Yeah, exactly. Figure out what you like and what the majority of readers like. That's actually quite important. If you want to sell books, don't be afraid to be yourself. That's something I definitely learnt after Draken, and kind of don't be afraid to show yourself in your writing. You're the only person who can sound like you. You know, everyone has a story, but so, you know, don't be afraid to kind of show that and be yourself. Also, I'd say if this career is truly for you, you'll probably find out when you're actually doing it, because it can be incredibly. It's not. I kind of hesitate to say this because obviously I'm very aware that there are, you know, how difficult some people have it, but there's no getting away from it. It is hard on you. It can be very hard on you mentally and even physically. The amount of writers I know with back problems or wrist problems, or like, it's, you know, it's almost like every writer I know has something going on. So it's not easy, you know, and it's kind of, so I think if you're doing it and you still want to do it, even when it's hard and even when you want to quit, if you then find yourself the next day going, that would make a great story, then they're probably, you know, this is probably meant for you, and just keep going until you find something that works, you know, because it might take more than one time, which is, I know, depressing, but it's the truth. So yeah, that's kind of the basics, I'd say. And the other stuff is just kind of like basic level, you know, find yourself a good editor. A good editor doesn't have to cost the earth. Don't think it does. Find a good cover artist by kind of researching, you know, what covers are drawing you in, and, you know, be aware that kind of the bigger cover art, you know, if you're seeing a book that's very, very popular and you love the cover art and you go check out the cover art, don't expect the cover artist is free or like, you know, freelance or something, because traditionally published books, usually the cover artist will be kind of contracted and cost a hell of a lot of money. So I actually kind of found my editor. I think I found my cover artist, or maybe my map illustrator, through Facebook groups, actually. So I did not go on like the big websites, you know, where they match you up with editors, those kinds of websites. I would advise not going on those because they cost a lot more than, you know, usual. Well, I don't say usual editors. But yeah, it doesn't have to cost the earth if you're, you know, if you're like if you're writing your first book and you don't have a lot of money, you know, don't think that you need to spend thousands and thousands, and learn how to market the book. That's honestly one of the most important things, because if you can't market it, I don't want to say it won't sell, because that's very harsh, but you can't just put a book on Amazon and expect it to sell. That's just not going to happen. Nowadays, you have to know how to work Amazon ads and all sorts of things, and it's a daunting task, but there are plenty of people who can help you do it, and different books and different kind of, you know, different writers who are helping other writers. You know, there's a big community out there that's willing to help. You just kind of have to look for it, really. So that's kind of the basic advice I'd give.
That's amazing. Yeah, we don't have a massive community, but we do have a community on TikTok, and just like we constantly sing your praises and keep telling everyone. So we're your guerrilla marketers out here telling everyone.
Yeah, and you know, that's honestly also that's one of the best. You know, if the thing is, it's just about getting enough people. If you can get people to find the book, then it's not that you have to stop marketing it, but the point is that then you can kind of get some momentum. You know, it's just about that first push to kind of make sure that people see your book as much as possible, because, you know, people deserve to see your book and see your talent and work, you know.
How are you on TikTok, Anil?
No, I'm not.
That's okay.
Yeah, I made Amy get on there. On TikTok, there's a whole section of book talk, and people are just we love books. We're just obsessed with books. And whenever I see people talking about Kingdom of Exiles, I'm always like, hey, it feels like
do people talk about it? Oh god.
Yeah, no, in a great way. Like there's a hashtag.
Oh my.
Yeah, no, people talk.
I promise I'm not completely, you know, I'm not completely out of touch. I don't know. I just haven't quite delved into TikTok yet. I think it can get quite overwhelming.
It's a time suck.
Yeah, it is.
It's a commitment. But unfortunately, we made an entire podcast revolving around TikTok and books. So we have to be on there. But I really genuinely hope that more people just discover everything about your writing and this book and the series, because it's one that I think deserves a lot of praise. And I think it's a book that's going to last, which I'm sure the series is going to last, but it's a good one. It's a good one.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps up our questions. Thank you so much for being with us today and taking time out of your schedule on a weekend. We really, really appreciate you and all of your great knowledge and advice. And I certainly am walking away from this with a lot of thoughts about how to proceed with my own writing.
Yep.
How long have you both been writing?
Oh, that's the shameful part. I've been working on my novel for probably a decade, but it's evolved so many times.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, creatively writing since easily like in my teens, you're writing stories. I wrote a very large, like actually book-sized fan fiction to my early year of college. But it's interesting because we both went to school for creative writing, but in many ways that disrupted the creative writing. It's like there's a lot of good things that we learned, but there was a lot of stuff that hurt us too.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that my education killed my imagination.
Yeah.
And it took me a really, really long time to find my voice again.
Yep, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. It's my mum's she was an English teacher, so I was actually in high school I was home educated, and one of the things she taught me was just write. Don't kind of just let it out. Just let go. Just kind of be as creative as you can be. But then I kind of did my it's called A levels anyway in the UK, and did English, and it just completely stone flat killed my interest in writing for about 3 years. So yeah, it's a funny thing. You can learn a lot, but it does put you in a box, I think, maybe.
Yeah, it does. But I mean, that's where we just kind of keep pushing, keep trugging along, and just trust yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, thank you, Nova. You have been wonderful, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Yep.
You've been awesome.
Sure, no worries. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this special episode of Book Talk for Book Talk. We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform.
As we gear up for Season 2, where we will deep dive into A Court of Mist and Fury, we will continue to share between-season thoughts and interviews with our listeners.
We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our form at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a weekly mini-episode.
If you are enjoying the podcast, visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and to learn about supporting the show through Patreon, Ko-Fi, or Venmo. Or find us on TikTok and Instagram at the handle Book Talk for Book Talk.
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets,
cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes per detail.